We're on a mission to explore Aylesford in England, where Our Lady appeared to St. Simon Stock in the 13th century, giving him the brown scapular, one of the most beloved sacramentals in Marian devotions. Let's explore Aylesford. My name is Michael O'Neill. I'm the miracle hunter. I research and investigate the supernatural, traveling the world to take a deeper look at how miraculous events have had a transformative effect on world history, inspiring some of Catholicism's most famous devotions and most magnificent churches. From miraculous images of the Virgin Mary and the inexplicably incorruptible bodies of great saints, to the miracles of the Eucharist and those who bear the wounds of Christ, journey with me around the globe to see the wonders that have inspired the fascination and faith of believers for centuries. We fly from Chicago on a 7.5-hour direct flight into London. From England's capital city, we must drive an hour and 15 minutes southeast to the famous site where the Carmelite monks have also restored their medieval monastery and built a beautiful pilgrimage center, a Carmel of peace and prayer that draws pilgrims from England and far beyond. Today, Aylesford is a town of some 5,500 residents. The old medieval town center right along the Medway River is still lovingly preserved, including a medieval arched bridge. Right along the river sits the Friars, the Carmelite Priory and shrine of Our Lady of the Assumption in St. Simon Stock, or St. Simon of England, as he is also called. The Carmelite Friars have a storied beginning that coincides with the Crusades. The first men of the order were crusaders who decided to lay down their arms and dedicate their lives to prayer, living as hermits in caves of Mount Carmel. This was during the time of the Latin Kingdom, the brief 2 centuries from 1099 to 1291, when the Christian knights of the Crusader movement had successfully established control of the Holy Land. On Mount Carmel, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, these knights turned hermits were inspired by the spirit of the Old Testament prophet Elijah. One of the most important prophets of the Old Testament, he had defeated the false prophets of the pagan god Baal on the heights of Mount Carmel, reminding Israel that the Lord God was the one and true God, the only God. The hermits took as their motto the cry of Elijah, "With zeal have I been zealous for the Lord God of hosts," and undertook the most important battle of all, the spiritual life. They lived and prayed under the patronage of Mary, in whose honor they built a chapel. They formalized their way of life through a rule given to them by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, St. Albert, in the year 1206, and communities of Carmelites spread to other places in the Holy Land. But as the decades of the 13th century passed, the Latin Kingdom became subject to increasing attacks from the surrounding Islamic Seljuk kingdom. Some Carmelites decided to return to Europe to continue their lives of prayer and penance, first to France, but then to England as well. Those who chose to remain on Mount Carmel were all later massacred by Seljuk raiders. The first monks arrived in England in 1242 and founded the monastery at Aylesford, on a parcel of land donated to them by the Crusader Richard de Grey. The move truly marked a new beginning for these hermits, whose lives had formerly been characterized by the arid solitude of Mount Carmel and the very difficult social and ecclesial conditions of the Latin Kingdom in the Holy Land. Life in England brought new challenges and new expectations. They had been a beloved part of the Christian life in the Holy Land, but found themselves often misunderstood in England. With their original brown and white striped cape, they seemed oddly exotic to the English. Other clergy and church leaders sometimes viewed them warily as foreign newcomers, since at that time many groups of friars had arisen in the mendicant spirit of orders such as the newly founded Franciscans and Dominicans. Luckily, Providence had granted the Carmelites a holy and prudent leader, St. Simon Stock. Born in the county of Kent, not far from Aylesford, he had embraced a hermit's life at a very young age. Tradition says that when barely a teenager, he went into the forest and lived in an old hollowed-out tree trunk. From this experience, he was known as St. Simon Stock. As a young man, he was inspired to join the Carmelite order and spent several years with the brothers on Mount Carmel before returning to his homeland. Confronted with the very different conditions and needs of English society, the Carmelites decided the best adaptation to European life meant joining the ranks of the new mendicant orders, such as the Franciscans and Dominicans, who dedicated their time to both prayer and itinerant preaching. But still, they needed ecclesial approval. At a time when ecclesial authorities feared too many religious groups were popping up, the Carmelite order's very existence hung in the balance. Under such duress, St. Simon Stock had recourse to Our Lady of Carmel, writing a prayer to Mary, the Flos Carmeli, or Flower of Carmel. O beautiful flower of Carmel, most fruitful vine, splendor of heaven, holy and singular, who brought forth the Son of God, still ever remaining a pure virgin, assist me in this necessity. O star of the sea, help and protect me. Show me that thou art my mother. He prayed incessantly, and on the feast of Our Lady of Carmel, July 16th, 1251, Mary appeared to him. She stood before him, holding out to him the brown Carmelite scapular. The apron-like garment was a common part of medieval dress, and also worn by monastics, as well as part of their habit. But on this day, Mary endowed the Carmelite scapular with her own special protection. She told St. Simon Stock, "Receive, my dear son, the scapular of your order, as the distinctive sign of the mark of the privilege that I have obtained for you and the children of Carmel." She told Friar Simon that from now on it would be a, quote, sign of salvation, a safeguard in perils, and the pledge of the peace and special protection until the end of the centuries. She concluded her message to him with the famous scapular promise: whoever dies in this garment will be preserved from eternal fires. St. Simon knew his prayers had been answered and the order's future assured. He also realized that this grace was not for the monks alone, but for everyone who put themselves under the protection of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Mary's message imbued the monks' mendicant mission with a new emphasis. As they roved the countryside and towns, ministering, providing the sacraments, and preaching, they also told those who they encountered about the blessings of the brown scapular. From this developed the practice of the investiture with the brown scapular, for monks in the long term, but later in the miniature form well known today and commonly worn by the laity. Besides its everyday use, the scapular had another function in the feudal system of the Middle Ages. On it, a knight or other vassal wore the insignia of his lord, which also served as a sign of the vassal's rank and honor in the feudal system. In a ceremony called investiture, it was placed on their honoree, who both pledged to serve his lord and receive the higher-ranking person's protection. For medievals, Christ was the highest lord, the Lord of Lords, to whom all of any rank must answer, and Mary was the Queen Mother, who interceded with her Son for humanity, as she had at the wedding feast of Cana in the Gospel of John. To be invested with the scapular meant to place oneself at the service of Christ and Mary, initiate their virtues, and receive their protection, a protection so clearly promised in the vision granted to St. Simon Stock. Throughout the centuries, numerous miracles have been attributed to the brown scapular. Popes, too, have confirmed and promoted the brown scapular devotion. A tradition holds that John the 22nd was the first pope to issue a papal bull, a document confirming and promoting the brown scapular devotion. Later popes of the 16th and 17th centuries also strongly promoted the brown scapular in documents that refer to the original bull of John the 22nd. If we return to Aylesford in the 13th century, St. Simon's Stock remained true to Our Lady of Mount Carmel and the Carmelite ideal his entire life. For 20 years he guided the order through rough waters, maintaining the true spirit of Carmel, while helping the monks to adapt to life that combined contemplative prayer and solitude. He was also the order's staunchest defender, helping the popes to understand the order and obtaining the Holy See's protection for the monks. He helped the order grow and establish monasteries across Europe. He is said to have lived well into old age, always maintaining the ascetic habits of his original hermit's life. At 100 years old, he undertook a journey to Bordeaux in France, at the request of the monks there. He died in Bordeaux on the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in the year 1265, and was buried in the city's cathedral, since he was widely considered a saint. The Pope at the time, Nicholas III, quickly confirmed St. Simon's sainthood. The Priory at Aylesford remained an important Carmelite community, right up until the Friars were forced out in 1538 as part of the English Reformation. They were finally able to buy back the property 4 centuries later in 1949, and the relics of St. Simon's Stock were brought to the monastery from France in 1951. Today, much of the original monastery has been beautifully restored. Those 400 years of the monks' absence were also part of the Priory story. During those centuries, it passed through numerous hands of various wealthy or aristocratic families. Now a royal estate instead of a religious one, the churches and chapels were torn down, and the monastic buildings naturally underwent serious changes in its transformation to a stately home. Merchant bankers, soldiers of World War II, and even the Boy Scouts of the United Kingdom have called the property home in one way or another and left their mark on it. At the same time, the Carmelites have always been present here, even if only in memory. Despite their long absence, the property was also always affectionately known as the Friars, in reference to the Carmelites. The turning point that brought the Friars back to their starting foundation in England came in the 20th century. At that time, the Hewitt family, who also had American connections, were leasing and living on the property. In the 1930s, a severe fire in the main house revealed several original medieval features of the structure. In 1934, the Hewitts bought the property. As they repaired the fire damage, they began restoring it in line with the original medieval architecture, preserving the newly uncovered medieval elements. It is thanks to the Hewitts that we can see the fine Gothic windows over the cloisters, even today. During the Second World War, soldiers were housed at the Friars on their way to the D-Day landing that started the invasion of Normandy and ultimate victory of the Allies. Mrs. Hewitt built a chapel for the men, which is now the Cloister Chapel. Her pious work masks, too, the beginning of the property's restoration to Catholic worship, since the chapel was formally consecrated by the Bishop of Rochester. Since Catholicism was restored in England to open full practice in 1829, the Carmelites were now once again active and present in the country, including the area around Aylesford, and Hewitts also had a warm relationship with the Carmelite friars. They often came to visit their former monastery from the nearby parishes of Feversham and Sittinghouse, always well received by Mrs. Hewitt. When she died in 1947, her eldest son inherited the Friars. He then sold it back to the Carmelites in 1949. The Friars undertook a major refurbishment project to bring the property back fully to its monastic origins, honor the centuries of history in its stones, and create a place of pilgrimage where people near and far could encounter the protection of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Reverting the massive property to a modern monastery fit for the Carmelite mission was no small task. Luckily, the community once again had an energetic and visionary leader. Under the theme, Courage to Build Anew, the first prior of the monastery's restoration, Father Malachi Lynch, inspired support for the undertaking and had a spiritual and artistic vision for the project that combined art, nature, history, and worship. The Friars repaired and restored the old buildings to preserve the best that its centuries of history had to offer. At the same time, they established gardens and rebuilt chapels. Father Malachi collaborated with some of the best ecclesial artists of the time, along with many local craftsmen and builders. The styles throughout the shrine included stained glass, ceramic, mosaics, and painting, to achieve his dream of prayer in art. To enter the Friars is at once to step back in time, into nature, and into the presence of Christ, who is ever ancient, ever new. The entire monastic and pilgrimage complex site sits on 47 acres of iconic English countryside, through which runs the Medway River. The natural surroundings, which remind us of the eremitical origins of the Carmelite order and of St. Simon Stock's early years as a hermit, imbue the shrine with serenity. The sound of birds chirping and singing, the wind rustling the trees, the lush green and the blue-gray sky, accented by flower gardens, calms the soul that arrives frazzled from the hustle and bustle of the modern workaday world. The pilgrim already finds himself encountering God as the hermits of Mount Carmel once did. Architecturally and artistically, the Priory is a combination of historical innovation and preservation. Historically, the oldest part of the complex is the Great Courtyard. Here we feel the full splendor of the history of the Friars in the architecture and the graceful aesthetics of its medieval origins. From the courtyard, we also have a panoramic view of the Prior's Hall and the cloisters, the Pilgrim's Hall, and the present guest house. Here were the original monastic living quarters, the heart of the 13th century priory, where the Carmelites lived, prayed, and ministered to those who came to them for spiritual or physical solace. Standing here, we can also notice the marks of time. When the friars were expelled, the priory building was turned into a stately Elizabethan country home. While some of the Gothic windows in the cloisters were preserved, most of the windows are Elizabethan, installed in the 17th century. From here, we can wander through the many inviting walkways and elegant arches that we encounter. We enter the Prior's Hall and the cloisters by steps past the stone horse mount, then pass through the lovely corridor of the cloisters to the main shrine. The heart of prayer of the Friars is the main shrine, dedicated to the Assumption of Mary. From the open space of the outdoor church, the sculpture of the Virgin Mary draws us in. Here she is depicted as Our Lady of the Assumption, the blue background and gold stars reminding us that she has preceded us to heaven, where she now intercedes for us. The blue starry scene is also evocative of Mount Carmel and its view of the Mediterranean Sea. Carmelites have a strong devotion to Mary under the title of Star of the Sea, the Virgin guiding us through the storms of this life to the port of heaven. Indeed, fittingly, the shrine contains some earth from the well of the prophet Elijah on Mount Carmel, so Mount Carmel, also a symbol of contemplation, is never far from our thoughts here in Aylesford. Accompanied by Mary, we can pause and allow ourselves to be taken in spirit to that oasis of prayer and solitude that so inspired both the prophet Elijah and all the first Carmelite monks. Like almost all the present chapels, the main shrine was constructed in the 1950s. It is the work of Adrian Gilbert Scott, who came from a family of architects who had long specialized in Gothic architecture. Together with Father Malachi, he designed the outdoor church in the form of a piazza. to be at once welcoming, spacious, and embracing for the many pilgrims the Carmelites hoped would find a spiritual home with them. It well accommodates the numerous pilgrims who come to the shrine on summer weekends and fill it with the sound of songs and prayers. The sound of processions along the Rosary Way that winds its way behind the chapel also wafts through, adding to the atmosphere of reverent joy. The Relic Chapel is another important place of prayer at the Friars, which we reach through the glass doors from the main shrine. Here, behind the altar, rest the relics of St. Simon Stock, brought to the shrine in 1951 after spending some 700 years in Bordeaux, France, where the saint had died. It's easy to see the hand of providence in both the absence and return of St. Simon's relics. Had they been in Aylesford at the time of the English Reformation, when the friars were expelled, they would most likely have been lost or destroyed. But the arrival of the relics coinciding with the restoration of the monastery seems to complete a long process. Through the centuries, the saint was watching over Aylesford and the Carmelites from heaven, and is accompanying his brothers in the restoration and modern missions of the Aylesford Priory, which must have always been particularly fond of St. Simon, as it was here that he was blessed with the scapular vision. The reliquary is the focal point of the chapel. It contains the full skull of St. Simon, visible even through the grille of the reliquary. The beautiful reliquary is a modern ceramic work, whose form replicates the ornate medieval reliquaries that dignified the remains of many saints. The words of the Flos Carmelite prayer St. Simon composed decorate the exterior, colored in yellow, brown, and white, the shades of the Carmelite habit and the Carmelite coat of arms. The design of the reliquary represents the cells of the hermits of Mount Carmel. It is the work of the Polish artist Adam Kozłowski, the creator of the distinctive ceramic work in all the various chapels of the Friars. A multi-talented artist, he was also an accomplished painter, which we will see in the Prior's Hall. Adam Kozłowski left his mark on Aylesford. His art was truly a prayer, an act of thanksgiving for his release from a slave labor camp in Russia. The Stations of the Cross, powerful representations of Christ's sufferings, line the walls of the chapels as well. To the right, a side chapel honors the saints of Carmel and the order's great figures, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Therese of Lisieux, and St. John of the Cross. Two modern martyrs, both victims of the Holocaust, also are depicted, St. Titus Brandsma and St. Edith Stein. The order's early English martyrs are symbolized here as well, in commemoration of those monks who died between 1535 and 1680. Returning back toward the great courtyard, we find the St. Anne Chapel, tucked into a corner just before we reach the main shrine. The simplicity, green accents, and unique ceramic art set this chapel apart artistically. It is again the work of Adam Kozłowski. For much of the wall decor, he employed a lovely and ancient ceramic technique called sgraffito that gives the walls of the chapel beautiful texture and intricate designs. It complements the 15th century statue behind the altar, depicting the Mother of Our Lady, St. Anne. St. Joseph's Chapel sits on the opposite side of the shrine. Here again we see the ceramic work of Kozłowski at its best, this time dramatic scenes of the life of Elijah, an inspirational figure of the Carmelites. The scale of these ceramic works are the largest at the Friars, fitting for such a fiery prophet. The scenes are dramatic and on a scale not seen anywhere else in the Priory. The strong statue of St. Joseph is the work of artist Joseph Clark. The monks gather each day, several times a day, at the choir chapel to recite the divine office. It features the beautiful Flos Carmelite window, a personal gift to the shrine by the renowned English stained glass window artist Myra Forsyth, who created many of the stained glass windows at the shrine. She was received into the Catholic Church in the cloister chapel in 1957. The cloisters were the original living quarters of the monks of Aylesford, turned into the various living quarters of the aristocrats and other inhabitants who lived here for 400 years between the Carmelites' expulsion and their return. Most of the building is still essentially medieval, such as the arches where we can still see the medieval mason marks. After the monks left, though, it became an opulent country house for its various lay inhabitants. In the 1660s, the wealthy banker who lived here at the time built a sumptuous ballroom on the first floor, which was preserved until a fire destroyed the interior of the building in the 1930s. Today, the cloisters have been completely restored, including the reconstruction of the Prior's seal. The Prior's Hall is also one of the medieval buildings on the site and has been beautifully restored. Its simple wood furnishings emanate the poverty and monastic life of the Carmelites. The panels of fine paintings throughout tell the story of the Carmelites from the origins of the community as hermits on Mount Carmel to their arrival in England and eventually being driven out by Henry VIII's commissioners. They depict, too, the modern history of the Friars' return in 1949. The Pilgrims' Hall is the oldest building in the Great Courtyard, probably built in the late 13th century. It served as a shelter for pilgrims on their way to Canterbury to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. Hospitality to pilgrims is part of the Carmelite charism for its origins on Mount Carmel, where they also offered shelter to pilgrims. That tradition continues today. In the Pilgrims' Hall, though over its history the building has served as a barn, a brewery, almshouse, and even the headquarters for a scouts group. Today, pilgrims will find here a place for a hot meal beside the great hearth. And now our time here in Aylesford has drawn to a close. Having gathered both spiritual and physical strength here at the Friars, we take with us on our journey home the peace and tranquility of Mount Carmel, brought to the green fields and forests of England. With St. Simon of England, we have Mary, the flower of Carmel, as a loving mother. Wearing her scapular, we take her promise of protection with us wherever we go.